Please everyone stand up. Let's welcome our keynote speaker for today's lecture, Professor of Larungar 5 Sciences Buddhist Academy, Khenpo Sodargye. Today is also a very auspicious day in Buddhism. On such an auspicious day, let's give warm applause to welcome Khenpo Sodargye, who will explain what Dharma truly is. Let's ask the Buddha.
Ask the Buddha, not me, okay? Today at this law school, I'm delighted to explore with all of you the precepts, shla in Buddhism, and the laws in real life, what differences exist and what similarities they share. I'm not trained in law, so having a non-specialist like me make comparisons. There may be some discrepancies in places, but I can chat with you all from a Buddhist studies perspective about how Buddhism interprets legal systems, laws, and the concept of Dharma itself. So this afternoon, in our short time together, let's discuss together what is Dharma. As the professor just mentioned, Dharma indeed has many meanings. We often say that in our daily lives, we cannot separate ourselves from Dharma. From Buddhism's perspective, so-called Dharma sometimes refers to principles or rules. Sometimes it denotes all phenomena, all things in the universe. For example, when we say all phenomena arise from mind, or all phenomena arise from causes and conditions, all phenomena cease from causes and conditions, at that time, Dharma means all things, including our emotions. All of this can be called Dharma. Sometimes we speak of according to Dharma or not according to Dharma. This seems quite similar to law. Or when we say someone broke the precepts or broke the law, there's some similarity to disciplinary codes. So broadly speaking, I believe the law you study in law school and the Dharma we discuss in Buddhism differ considerably. According to the philosopher Vasubandhu, Dharma has 10 meanings, and so on, many more. For example, knowledge is called Dharma. The path is called Dharma. Even the tranquil nirvana is called Dharma. In that case, what we call Dharma, in a certain sense, perhaps among those present, when gaining an understanding, the so-called Buddha Dharma might be considered a religion. For example, in religion, Buddhism speaks of taking refuge in the three jewels, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So among these, what is Dharma? It's the teachings the Buddha expounded. His doctrine is called Dharma. At this point, in the Indian language, we call it Dharma. Dharma means doctrine. What does Dharma mean here? A method and special principle for liberating you from suffering. Such a method and such a special principle is called Dharma. Broadly speaking, I think the scope of our Dharma is quite extensive. And this Dharma, compared to what you study in law, for example, civil law, marriage law, criminal procedure law, criminal law, I studied some of this when I was in middle school, but that was 30 years ago. I don't remember much anymore, just some traces remain. Back then there were some things in our law and politics courses, but in my impression, the law discussed there, so-called legal systems actually, grant people certain rights and corresponding obligations. When disputes arise or unequal treatment occurs, the governing authorities provide a unified method to resolve these matters. Such a method we can call law, or sometimes there's constitutional law, national law, civil law, including international law, and so on, many such methods. But these methods and Buddhist precepts, in some respects I think, are very similar. How so? In restraining people's wrongdoing, in stopping evil and promoting good, there's similarity. But law protects people's basic standards, whereas Buddhist precepts, perhaps on this foundation, on this principle, go even further. Because law might be standards that cannot cross the lowest baseline. Once you cross this line, you receive legal punishment, whereas precepts, perhaps on this foundation, are even more complete, even not only restraining wrongdoing, but to a certain extent guiding you to perform good deeds. In abandoning evil and cultivating good, I feel law mainly focuses on abandoning evil, restraining wrongdoing with certain limits. Those who study law do so to protect people's lives, property, or the rights and obligations they possess, giving them fair answers or solutions. Whereas precepts not only protect oneself and others, but to an even greater extent, eliminate wrongdoing in one's mind. For example, Buddhist precepts have 3 levels. The highest level is called Vajrayana vows. The middle level is called Bodhisattva vows, and the more basic level is called pratimoksha, liberation by avoiding evil vows. Vajrayana vows have countless precepts. This discipline is very difficult to uphold. Bodhisattva vows are also especially numerous, but primarily there are 3 root vows. What are these 3 vows? The vow of gathering virtuous practices, gathering all good activities, the vow of restraining wrongdoing, ceasing all evil actions. This is quite similar to our laws and pratimoksha vows. Then there's also the vow of benefiting sentient beings, helping all life, all sentient beings, not only helping humans, but also animals and other beings beyond humans. So you see, our laws perhaps at most prohibit doing these wrongful acts, but beyond that, precepts on how to help beings, how to perform virtuous deeds, these don't exist in law. This is the middle level precept. Next comes pratimoksha vows. Pratimoksha vows, which many now recognize as so-called Buddhist precepts. These include monastic and lay precepts. Monastic precepts, for example, full ordination for nuns, bhiksun, has 360 vows. For monks and bhiksu, 250 vows. Below that are novice monk and novice nun vows, shramanera, shramaner, and below that, laymen and laywomen, upasaka, upasika, or what we call the 5 lay precepts. The 5 lay precepts are the foundation of all precepts. Whether Vajrayana vows, Bodhisattva vows, or pratimoksha vows, the foundational content of all vows. We often speak of 3 refuges and 5 precepts, or 10 virtues and 5 precepts, and 10 virtuous actions and 5 precepts. Not killing, not stealing, not sexual, not misconduct, not lying, and not taking intoxication. These are the 5 root precepts. Generally speaking, basic Buddhists, there are 2 types of Buddhists. One type only takes refuge in the 3 jewels. In their hearts, they aspire toward the Buddha. They don't oppose it. They can continue practicing the Buddha's teachings. They haven't taken the 5 precepts. Generally, perhaps many people in Tibetan regions haven't directly taken the 5 precepts. If they take the 5 precepts, perhaps their level is somewhat higher. Taking refuge in the 3 jewels is easier. I just take refuge. I sincerely take refuge. This also counts as precepts, but isn't included in the 5 precepts. If you take the 5 precepts in Buddhism, these are called the 5 root precepts. These 5 root precepts, perhaps some students think, what I most dislike are restrictions. I don't want to be constrained. I don't want to be bound by these Buddhist precepts. Perhaps some have such thoughts. But this way of thinking isn't necessarily correct. Why? Having some constraints on your moral conduct. Actually, this is a requirement for your character. Moreover, with such precepts, you restrain your wrongdoing. With such restraint, it helps guide your life's direction. Just like when we drive, if there were no red lights or green lights, probably everyone would be stuck in traffic jams already. Just now, someone driving was especially anxious. This red light, red light. But actually, there's nothing to be anxious about. Just like on our roads, we need green lights and red lights. Without red lights, probably all vehicles would crash into each other. Similarly, whether Buddhists or non-Buddhists, on life's road, actually, we still need some precepts to guide us. But are these precepts reasonable? I think so. Today, I'll briefly analyze the 5 precepts for you. You study law, you're rather serious. If I put it nicely, quite serious. I've visited some before. But if I put it bluntly, generally those who study law are rather rigid, lacking that emotional side, just very stiff, always thinking their own thoughts are, as if only law is reasonable, measuring everything by law. But some of you young people may not yet know, when you get outside school, some matters simply can't be resolved just by talking about law. Though law says this, the outside world doesn't necessarily follow it. Even when it's followed, there are many loopholes in the law. So perhaps we should also have some emotional mindset and rational wisdom. Both are indispensable in this world. As I just mentioned, some say these 5 precepts feel like constraints on people. I don't think so. Though the 5 precepts come from Buddhism, they now play an immeasurable role in regulating human behavior. In any country, it seems when someone breaks the 5 precepts, they don't have a good reputation in that country or among those people. It's like this in African countries, in Europe, in America, now including India, China, everywhere it's like this. I often go to prisons. When I visit prisons, most people are there because they broke the 5 precepts. I ask, what's your offense? I'm a murderer. I killed someone. That's why I'm here. What crime did you commit? In my life, I committed rape, or I engaged in prostitution, or I trafficked women. That's why I was convicted. Breaking the precept against sexual misconduct led to their downfall. Some I ask, how did you commit a crime? I embezzled, or I robbed, or I stole. This is breaking the precept against stealing. Some say lying in Buddhism means major falsehoods, deception completely beyond imagination. Now we have online fraud and various fraudulent phenomena in the world, all kinds, including in product promotions, advertisements, or in person-to-person communication, completely deceiving others. Because they deceived many people, they ended up in prison. Some, though currently in this country, drinking alcohol isn't a crime. That's probably not the case. But actually, alcohol and, say, drugs aren't that different. Both are addictive. Both can trap you. Some say, why did I commit a crime? Because I was drunk and my mind wasn't clear. I got into a fight and stabbed someone to death. Or because I drank and drove, I crashed and killed someone, etc. So most people, when we sum it up, most of those now in prison for crimes broke the 5 precepts. If everyone in the world kept the 5 precepts, honestly, prisons would basically be empty. So sometimes in Buddhist gatherings, there are fewer police officers. Even when present, they have little to do because these people all keep the 5 precepts. If police come to maintain order, probably there aren't any major issues. So at such times, I often think, over 2,500 years ago, Buddha Shakyamuni taught us the so-called 5 precepts. These 5 precepts in any ethnicity, any country, are behavioral norms we all need. These 5 fundamental principles are very important. And any other law, any legal system, actually over 2,000 years, they've changed, needless to say, earth-shaking changes. We know that when I was young, when I was little, many fundamental laws are no longer used now. Some laws we had to enforce back then have now been overturned. Various, every country, every place has this. But these 5 precepts have remained entirely unchanged. Now in people's conduct, they're called standards, behavioral norms. Why is this? Perhaps some students here should also examine this. I've heard some of you students apparently don't quite believe in Buddhism. Not believing is fine. Having no faith is your freedom. Having faith is also your freedom. But some think this is superstition. This point I don't accept, because if you say it's superstition, just saying verbally you're superstitious, I don't quite agree with that. Perhaps you see some temple incense burning and worship, and you can't stand it, and use that reason to say you don't believe. Or perhaps you hold some so-called scientism view, using scientific authority to overturn all traditional culture and religious thought. This is also a big mistake. I feel this way of thinking is somewhat conservative. One could say it's ignorant behavior. A very few students might think Buddhism in this world is an ancient, outdated, corrupt, or decaying ideology. But this way of thinking requires you to sharpen your eyes of wisdom. You should re-examine all phenomena of things, whether Buddhism or other religions. In human history, they've existed for millions of years, such a long time. They possess tremendous vitality, their existence, their charm, their vigor, their irreplaceable role, thriving here. How many years have other cultures, other knowledge and phenomena survived in this world? Everyone can see this clearly. So in a certain sense, we should understand, when you study law, actually most laws have certain connections with religion. We know many of our current laws are related to Western, including America, Europe, some countries' thinking and frameworks. At their inception, actually, Christianity had tremendous influence on them, including our property law, tort law, including criminal law. Many, many frameworks come from Christianity. Christianity specifically has something called the 10 Commandments, but the first parts of the 10 Commandments are about worshiping their God, these aspects. By the 5th, it's called honoring your parents. Then the 6th is thou shalt not kill. The 7th is thou shalt not commit adultery. Then the 8th and 9th are respectively not bearing false witness and not stealing. This shares commonalities with our Buddhist 5 precepts. So regarding these principles, it's very necessary for you young people here to sometimes observe and analyze. Sometimes when we observe with our own wisdom, is there anything you need to extract from so-called traditional culture? If we use only one single modern way of thinking or current concept to solve all problems, I'm afraid there'll be certain difficulties in this world. This includes those studying law as well. So regarding this, it's very necessary for us to examine, as I just mentioned, the 5 precepts Buddhism teaches in a certain sense can completely correspond with current laws in meaning. Moreover, these 5 precepts Buddhism teaches also have corresponding points with Confucian culture, the professor just mentioned. We know Confucian culture often speaks of benevolence, ren, righteousness, yi, propriety, li, wisdom, zi, and trustworthiness, exin. These are its basic principles. Actually, we can also correspond these several principles. For example, so-called ren, benevolence, can be replaced by not killing living beings, not murdering human life, because ren has benevolent love, compassion, helping all humanity. Confucian thought mainly focuses on humanity, a people-centered ideology. So primarily with benevolent love, one won't kill people, won't harm other people. Thus, Rien completely corresponds with our not killing, not murdering, because in Buddhism's precept against killing, the first and primary is not killing humans, taking human life as the standard. If killing animals, though it's a wrongdoing, it becomes a lesser offense, not the primary offense. Second, why I righteousness can completely correspond with not stealing. Because not stealing, so-called why, means accepting through proper means, accepting through any improper methods and means, striving for possessions one shouldn't have. This is improper. So this can correspond with not stealing. Then so-called lighten for propriety, we often say it can respect oneself and respect others, including in Confucian thought, and Buddhism can also teach this. Except for one's own spouse, no sexual relations with others, no such connections. Such pure conduct you can call LIE, or call it not committing sexual misconduct. The fourth is called what? It's what we call not lying. Not lying means trustworthiness, with a pure mind, not deceiving others. All their means should be not fraudulent, not deceptive. This is trustworthy sincerity, reliability, creditworthiness. The last one is drinking alcohol. Actually, after drinking, our minds become unclear. Everything we do might run counter to our intentions. So this can correspond with wisdom, because wisdom, all four precepts can be established relying on wisdom. If our minds aren't clear, or even in a confused state, including some drinking alcohol, actually, all five precepts can be broken. There's a story in Buddhism. Originally, there was a person who didn't steal, commit adultery, or kill. A woman told this practitioner, either you marry me or kill this sheep. You must do one of these, absolutely must. He refused both, saying, I'm someone who keeps pure precepts, I won't. Later, if really none of these work, can you drink this bottle of alcohol? He said, well, drinking alcohol should be okay. Probably won't break the four root precepts. So he drank. After drinking, he ended up killing, committing adultery, and stealing and lying when others asked him. So now regarding alcohol, many people think no feast without wine. They think drinking brings happiness, but actually alcohol and drugs, in a certain sense, aren't that different. The harm is tremendous. Whether in the Northeast, perhaps in your Jiangnan region, it's also like this. Now people's drinking habits are very strong. Actually, after drinking, your mental state becomes completely confused. For example, if you drink today, your entire thinking today is in a chaotic state. What you say then, what you do, it's all abnormal. Similarly, drug use now is also a kind of numbness, also a confused state. For this reason, some countries, originally America planned nationwide prohibition, but later this law didn't succeed. So I wonder if many young people in the future can keep Buddhism's 5 precepts or not. But if you can keep them for your future growth and development, they'll play a very important role. Whether you become a leader or an ordinary worker, in your conduct, at least you can eliminate killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and lying. At the same time, if you need a healthy mindset and healthy body, you also need to stop drinking alcohol. I wonder if any of you students here have been drinking. But generally, teachers, civil servants, including many entrepreneurs, it seems that not drinking is impossible in this era. Some leaders can't openly drink alcohol, so they pour liquor into mineral water bottles. When I'm often with them, oh, it's fine, this is mineral water. Turns out the mineral water is full of wuliangye or whatever. I shouldn't say this, right? What I just discussed are some individual precepts in Buddhism that perhaps also share commonalities with some rules in real life. I hope students will also explore this when necessary. I'm thinking the differences between law and precepts. Perhaps precepts primarily focus not only on one's bodily and verbal conduct, having some established rules and regulations. More importantly, precepts are in the mind. Though law also, for example, intentional homicide versus manslaughter, it observes and understands psychology. For instance, behavioral externalism. Through conduct, it observes the motive at that time. There are such methods of observation, but more often, it judges whether an event occurred based on bodily, verbal, and physical conduct, using this to observe, whereas in Buddhism, much is accomplished through one's own mind. Whether breaking precepts or doing anything, we look at whether one's mind is virtuous or not virtuous. If the mind isn't virtuous or one's motivation wasn't entirely this, it means this matter won't be complete. Therefore, all these Buddhist conducts, Buddhism has a very famous gatha you all should know. This is from over 2,500 years ago. Now people should also be able to live by this principle. Refrain from all evil, practice all good, purify your mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. Some even don't know what Buddhism is. Perhaps burning incense and worshipping Buddha is Buddhism. It's probably unscientific. Actually, Buddhism, I believe, is truly an extremely profound, vast, or unfathomably deep body of knowledge. It can completely be a kind of encyclopedia of knowledge. For example, on my journey this time later at their medical school, I just discussed with the professor a while ago when I was in Beijing. Their schools of economics and management medical schools. Each place has different aspirations. Teaching Buddhist art, Buddhist management methods, Buddhist views on wealth, etc. On one hand, I lack these worldly specializations, so I don't have great confidence. But on the other hand, I'm very confident. Why? Buddhist knowledge can actually touch upon these areas of knowledge. From an artistic level, as early as over 2,500 years ago, much knowledge exists within this. If we discuss some law or precepts level, we can also talk about it. For example, you're called a law school, we're called a Vinaya Academy, specifically studying precepts, how to tame one's body, speech, and mind. Each precept is exactly the same as many of your methods. Compared to some of your legal systems, one could say it's even more complete, because over 2,500 years ago, it didn't need revision. Look at how difficult revising some of our current laws is. After a few years, it needs revision again. When revising, it must pass through the National People's Congress. Some still can't be approved. Sometimes through democracy, there's also no way. The year before last, that charity law, how many times was it proposed at the National People's Congress and Political Consultative Conference? But in the end, what happened? Very, very difficult. Yet some precepts, indeed from over 2,000 years ago, including our way of dressing, way of eating, monastics have monastic precepts. These precepts are completely usable now, very fresh, very vital. When you research them, you might realize Buddhism isn't what I imagined. A few old ladies worshipping Buddha in temples. Buddhism is superstition. Now I meet some young students, extremely, extremely naive, thinking very simply, you believe in this? That's so ridiculous, so unnecessary. Actually, perhaps sometimes we're short-sighted. At a certain point, the saying goes, at 50, one knows heaven's mandate. At 60, the ear is attuned. At that time, when you reach 50, you might realize, originally, when I was in university, in middle school, or when I studied abroad, when I was a doctoral student, I thought about so many things too simplistically, including relationships between past and present lives, principles like good deeds bring good outcomes, evil deeds bring evil outcomes. Some people fundamentally don't acknowledge these. Not acknowledging is also fine, but sometimes perhaps we need to explore. Past and present lives. I don't know if any of you here don't acknowledge them. Actually, not acknowledging is also okay, but I feel now many people, including people in your system, have evidence, personally stepping forward to say my past life was such and such. It seems Dr. Henry Lee. I recall he's also from your Zhejiang region. He's an international criminal investigator. Last year, for a period, I continuously watched many of his videos. I think this person, on one hand, is a mysterious figure. Today you're talking about who the mysterious figure is, just now guessing, very lively. It seems you need some arts and entertainment. Perhaps you're very interested in these aspects, but I feel he's also a rather mysterious figure. Why? Throughout the world, including some case solving, Clinton's scandals at the time, including Kennedy, Nixon, many major cases, his case solving has unique characteristics. But how is he himself? What interests me more is his mother, quite remarkable, a Buddhist. She gave birth to 13 children. All, it seems, the father died early. But in the end, all 13 became doctoral students. And they're all doctoral students, not like some doctoral students here. These are from America. Getting admitted to a doctorate in America, truly, it's still very difficult. In the end, she raised all of them to become doctoral students. This mother is extraordinary. This is what interests me. I don't know how she raised children. Now, some parents here, with even one child, they can't raise them to become doctoral students. The child runs away from school midway. Some can't even complete middle school. They ran away in between. So I don't know how she raised them. This is also quite interesting. Also, he himself said his past life was a monk. In a speech at Peking University, some people asked him, "What's your greatest regret in this life?" He said, "Coming into this world," because when he was little, soon after birth, he cried every day, every day. Later, his mother apparently took him to many rural doctors. No way to solve the problem. Later, one time, a monk knocked on the door. The mother thought he came for alms, gave him money. He said, I don't want money. I've come to see my master. She said, who's your master? There's no such master here. He said, did your family give birth to a child who cries every day? He is my master. May I pay respects to him? So he paid respects and then he left. After he left, that child, Dr. Henry Lee, when he was little, never cried again. He said, I can't remember now, but this is what my mother told me. It's also a fact. He feels his past life was such a remarkable high monk, then in this life became such a police investigator. Life is very strange. Originally, he didn't want to come to this human world at all. He didn't want to come. But after coming here, his name, later that monk gave him the name Jie Chen, release from worldly dust. When he was little, his name was Jie Chen, very meaningful. I think as an international criminal investigator, he wouldn't deceive people. This is a true event. So perhaps young people sometimes think too simplistically, this might be superstition, this is his special ability, this is a secret. Beyond that, we lack the capacity to contemplate its more mysterious, more profound, more subtle aspects. This point, perhaps young people need to observe to understand. At this point, let's look, I just mentioned the principle, refrain from all evil, practice all good. Actually, this is Buddhism. From a legal perspective, perhaps at most it's refrain from all evil. If all evils are committed, what laws are broken? Discussing from this angle, what are evil and good? The Buddhist Abhidharma Mahavibhasa Shastra states, any conduct harmful to oneself and others, this is called evil. Conduct causing no suffering to oneself and others, even bringing happiness. Such conduct is called good. This is how good and evil are distinguished. So when we speak of good and committing evil, this boundary can be understood to a great extent. So I see those of us studying law, including some young people. In the future, you'll likely apply your laws to varying degrees. For example, we practitioners use our practice methods to benefit humanity or to contribute to society. In this process, you'll likely need to use your own law and expertise. But I also know some of your conduct might exploit legal loopholes. At such times, one needs one's own conscience. I once read, probably a few years ago, an article in a book called The Price of Conscience. A judge was resolving a case. When resolving it, he saw both parties litigating. During litigation, one side had no fault, but they were extremely, extremely weak. No economic strength, no leadership support, etc. The other side clearly had fault, but their power was rather strong, economic backing, etc. At this time, the judge could resolve it after observation, and the judge had 100% authority in this case. But the party at fault kept bribing him. Initially, they gave him 100,000 when he felt his conscience reproached him. I won't listen to them. Later, the money kept increasing, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. At 400,000, he still didn't agree. Finally, they raised it to 500,000. At 500,000, money's temptation was rather great. Finally, he agreed, then began his ruling. After ruling, those who had no fault earlier, they'd already lost in the eyes of the law. Then the one at fault with money, who gave him 500,000, they'd won. Later, when chatting with other friends, he said, my conscience is worth only 500,000, so I've sold my conscience completely. So I wonder if you, when you enter society later, will also be subjected to this, though now the situation differs somewhat from before. But one's own conscience, who knows what its price is? This is something those studying law should also consider. Otherwise, our society is rather chaotic, rather complex. Right now, you're in such a pure, clean life. Perhaps you can talk about justice, integrity, trustworthiness, all the worldly things, including your wisdom and reasoning, etc. But when you enter society, our society, it's called a world where materialism runs rampant. Here, there's much evil energy, much unwholesome atmosphere. Under such unwholesome atmosphere and hazy air, each of us might be polluted to varying degrees. First, perhaps I'm polluted by the air, my respiratory organs. Gradually, my wisdom and my mind also become polluted to varying degrees. Then perhaps my actions and conduct in my behavior, in my spirit, also suffer certain impacts. This way, perhaps some people in real life, though they study law themselves, might later also walk on the path of illegality. When I visit prisons, there are also many law majors. I'm not telling you something inauspicious, but we humans have good aspirations and hopes, and also some sense of prevention against the bad. Though you specialize in this field, if in the future we don't have lawful conduct, the future is also bleak, frightening. Including us practitioners is the same. Practitioners, monastics have monastic precepts, lay practitioners have lay precepts. But if their precepts aren't well studied, if they break precepts, then their entire future also becomes especially bleak, even downfall. So in a certain sense, I feel so-called law and precepts should guide people toward good, should prevent people from falling into the abyss of illegality or suffering, a protective wall. But the maintainers of this protective wall, we who study law or we who study precepts, these people all have this duty and this right. So how do we transmit such positive energy? Actually, everyone should have responsibility, such responsibility, including some professors I just met. Truly, their thinking is very good because on one hand, researching religion as a whole, whether Christianity or Buddhism, including Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, research in these areas is very, though we didn't have much time to converse, I felt it was excellent. Actually, sometimes law in ancient societies, I've also read some, including some Confucian thought. Confucius previously also said, using virtue to remove punishment, using virtue to remove punishment, using moral education to eliminate criminal punishment. If we cultivate people's noble thoughts and moral conduct, so-called punishment, so-called established laws, actually in his eyes aren't very important. Laozi, in something I forget where, discusses governing by doing nothing that goes against nature. Regarding governing by doing nothing that goes against nature, his concept isn't deliberately, coercively establishing some law to control someone's behavioral standards, not like this. He doesn't emphasize this. His is each person through conscious self-improvement, self-discipline, then through this governs the country, governs oneself. What Buddhism teaches is one should purify one's own mind, properly adjust one's own mind. So generally, Taoist thought governing by doing nothing that goes against nature, this view, but now it probably won't work. We also know now countries worldwide basically follow Western legal systems. Adopting this framework, then each country, according to its own national circumstances, begins making adjustments, thus having such legal systems. So these legal systems, perhaps in human society's ongoing developmental process, will also continuously change. But I can dare to guarantee our Buddhist 5 precepts, as long as human society exists in this world, perhaps these behavioral standards can't change. Buddhism's 5 precepts should be needed by our society even during its entire existence. Because if we humans can casually kill people, casually destroy families, casually steal, casually rape, if such a society appeared, it would already have collapsed. This social system would already have collapsed. Originally, we humans, according to ancient culture, highly advocated by Xunzi, humans cannot exist without community. Actually, human life is community, many people forming a group together. Our human lives are like this. Like in the past, according to the ancient saying, small states with few people, small countries, different peoples, people also relatively few. But now there are only large states with many people. No other way. If countries want to be prosperous, people want to be wealthy, then there must be many law-based countries controlled by law. If there's no legal control, I'm afraid people have all sorts of, especially now there are so many young people. I also hope today here, these young people studying law, in the future, regarding your own behavioral standards, you should have strict requirements. Now, many studying law think, I'll have methods in the future. What should I study in the future? They never think, how will I discipline myself in the future? They don't realize in their lives they might encounter many temptations, encounter many such illegal matters, just like we discussed earlier, conduct that might make our conscience feel reproached. At that time, how do I face this? Perhaps during your learning process, you should also think about this. As someone currently in the period of studying law, right now many of us sometimes break laws. It's not that they don't understand law, but this law hasn't merged into their minds, hasn't been executed. Just like us practitioners, Buddhist practitioners also teach, if you don't act according to the Dharma becomes non-Dharma. This saying is a very famous maxim. For example, if a practitioner don't follow the proper methods and doctrines, finally you become a non-Buddhist unlawful person. Originally, you specifically studied law. Finally, you break the law yourself, stand before the law yourself, and receive judgment in court yourself. This is a very sad thing. Therefore, as a person, what should we cultivate from childhood? It shouldn't be your business to look at others' faults. I should judge others. I am such and such. If from childhood one has such concepts cultivated this way. Perhaps when you grow up, you yourself have never disciplined your own mind. You're in a very dangerous state. There's this possibility and danger. So we very much hope everyone during the learning process, what's more important is when you yourself understand the law, this law, Buddhism teaches, merge into your own mind. In your daily life and daily conduct, it should be reasonable and lawful. If reasonable and lawful, then a lawful person can travel anywhere in the world very joyfully. I feel everyone very much needs this kind of conduct. In any case, everyone in a reasonable, lawful environment, working reasonably and lawfully. This way, ultimately, according to Buddhism's meaning, one also obtains truly reasonable and lawful consequences. In Buddhism, there's a very famous phrase, what is it? When this exists, that exists. When this arises, that arises. When this doesn't exist, that doesn't exist. When this ceases, that ceases. This saying comes from the Ratnakuta Sutra. The Ratnakuta Sutra states, whatever dharma we have produces whatever fruit. Whatever cause there is produces whatever fruit. Without such a cause, such a fruit isn't produced, meaning such a fruit is extinguished. So its cause and effect relationship completely corresponds mutually. This correspondence isn't some think that the Buddha established this. Actually, it isn't established by the Buddha. The Buddha isn't the establisher of laws. But Buddhism's concept, he is the discoverer of truth. We can say this, the Buddha is the discoverer of truth. There's a saying, what is it? Whether the Tathagata appears or doesn't appear, the Dharma nature abides eternally. This saying is very important, coming from Buddhism's Shalistamba Sutra. The meaning is, whether the Buddha appeared in this world or didn't appear in this world, this doesn't matter. Most important is the principle he taught. Just now we discussed good deeds bring good outcomes, evil deeds bring evil outcomes. Such karmic principles, or humans having past and future lives, such karmic principles, or according to some legal explanations, if people do bad things, temporarily they might hide somewhere, but ultimately their karmic retribution, or when their conditions arrive, they themselves will also receive certain legal sanctions. This is a natural principle. So now it's very necessary for humanistic culture and natural principles these two conditions to converge. This is called the principle of convergence of causes and conditions. Many legal scholars, I don't know if there's research in this area. If there's been research, this is the best aid for one's own life. I also hope many of you from Buddhism and other traditional cultures also find your own life path. I just also told some professors, actually Buddhism is excellent. Why? I'm not recommending the Dharma to you because I study Buddhism, not like that. But it can change your life. Because whatever kind of person you are, in the future, you'll definitely need to face people's birth, aging, sickness, death. You'll face many impermanent matters, face many temptations. At that time, if you have a guiding spiritual direction, this is the crystallization of wisdom, the best nectar of our life experience. Therefore, each of us on life's journey needs a lamp of wisdom, such a lamp of wisdom. Perhaps you can obtain it in your specialty, or perhaps in some traditional culture, you can also obtain it. In any case, you have your own right to choose. Okay, I'll stop here.